Welcome back, everybody. We are in our hybrid session today with Mark Conrad. He was recommended to us by our friend Ann Mikan from Fairfield DD. He helped their county board with some public records retention. And I know that's always something that comes up at our communications meetings that we have. If people just, have a lot of questions about what to keep, what to get rid of, and things like that. So we're really excited about this presentation because this is something that we all need, even though it might not be the most exciting topic, but it's something we all have to do in our day-to-day life. So sorry, you're going to make it exciting though. Look at his glasses. Yeah. Mark Conrad retired as the IT director for Fairfield County in 2021, having been employed at various IT roles for 21 years. During the last half of his employment, he also became involved in records management, and as IT director was the main advisor to the Fairfield County Data Board, which include reviewing departmental record retention schedules and record disposal certificates. He was a member and often board member of the Ohio County Archivists and Records Management Association, CARMA, an organization of archivists and records management from the county governments of Ohio's 88 counties. ARMA, Greater Columbus, a records management and information governance organization composed of records professionals from both private and public organizations in Central Ohio, and the Ohio Electronic Records Committee, a committee of records professionals that identifies best practices and develops resources concerning the creation, maintenance, and long-term preservation and access to the electronic records of Ohio's public entities. Most recently, post-retirement, Mark worked with the Fairfield County Board of DD to rework their entire records retention schedule. In his retirement, Mark spends his time with his family, serves his church, and co-leads NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness in Fairfield County. Please welcome Mark Conrad.
Good afternoon. So we're going to be talking about records. I know everyone's excited about that. I don't have a lot of jokes, no magic tricks, but we're going to be talking about policy and procedure, lay some groundwork, build up from that, have some time for questions, and just help you get a handle on how to deal with records. So that's where we are today. Get this going. There we go. Is this what you feel like? Drowning in records. And that's what we want to actually get a handle on here. Hit the right button here. That's just a description. Some caveats. So my stuff isn't coming through. I want to mention, you are the expert in your subject area. I did this a lot when I was doing records management. I was an IT person. I knew IT, I knew records policies, but I didn't know clerk of courts, I didn't know DD, I didn't know prosecuting attorney necessarily. It was a combination, it's a team effort that you work together on it. So I'm up here going to be telling you about the process of records management. You'll have to take that process and apply it to your specific area of expertise. So when I talk about, oh, you got to set a records retention for this record series, you have to figure out, is that 2 years, 5 years, permanent? What needs to be done with this information? I'm going to help you identify what is a record, what is a record series, how are we allowed to destroy them appropriately, or when do we need to keep them? I'm not your legal representative. Sometimes this gets into legal things, so you may need to talk to your own prosecuting attorney, whoever represents your organization in the counties. I think it's usually the prosecuting attorney in most counties, so just be aware of that, whoever it is. And we're going to be covering the basics, and you feel free to ask questions at any time. We'll have time for questions at the end as well, and we'll have a lot of things going on here. We are going to talk a lot about the gray area. We operate in records according to applicable laws, rules, codes, but sometimes gray areas exist. And when there's a gray area, and when there's competing values among the laws, the rules, and the codes, we turn to best practices. And that's what we're going to do today, is talk about that as well. Not everything is just nice, black, and white. So I will be referencing the Ohio Revised Code, just so you know it's there. I do have a stack of materials that was put on the, I think it's some kind of intranet you guys have access to. I meant to have this on there. I got on there last night, but there is a copy of this being handed out. If you don't have one of these, we can get one to you as well. And there's a link to the Higher Revised Code on that. But that's on the internet as well. I just got it there late because I missed it when I was first putting things together. So I'll be referencing the Higher Revised Code. That gives us our basis for records management. So what is a record? Records includes any document, device, or item, regardless of physical form or characteristic, including an electronic record as defined in section 1306.01 of the Revised Code, created or received by or coming under the jurisdiction of any public office of the state or its political subdivisions, which serves to document the organizations, functions, policies, decisions, procedures, operations, or other activities of the office. Breathe. Did anyone understand what I just read? No. That's Revised Code speak. We're going to take this apart a little bit and put it into chunks that'll make it understandable. But this ultimately is your skeleton for what is a record. This defines legally what makes a record in Ohio. And we're going to take that apart a little bit. So a couple other things, and this presentation is also in that handout. I'm not going to read all of this. But there's also a section of the code, 1306.01, various sections that define what makes an electronic record. Because with something in the law, with revised code, you have to get everything very, very specific. That's why it's got so many words attached to it. As soon as a word isn't part of the code, someone challenges the law and says, well, you didn't say this. That's what all this is talking about. All it really tries to tell you is, in the electronic version, electronic stuff does equal records. You can't hide something in electronics and pretend it's not a record just because it's electronic, whatever that means. Cloud, zip drive, flash drive, email, no matter how you want to define it, it's still a record. We're going to look into records a little more specifically in a minute. We also want to take a look at what influences records retention. There are 4 values that influence retention. So we've talked a little bit about a record. We're going to get more into that in a little bit. Basically, anything that says something about your organization and whatever it does. So, for example, if you get an email, and the email says, it's Janet's birthday today and there is cake in the coffee room, that's not a record. It doesn't define the work of your office. But if you get an email that says, Johnny's parents were here and they're complaining that the teacher hasn't followed the IEP and they're demanding that we have a meeting before they take legal action, that's going to be a record. Because your office actually does that as an office. That defines what your office does. It's part of your normal business as what you exist to do. So that's what a record is, and we'll see that again in a minute. Retention deals with how long do I have to keep this record? When am I allowed to destroy it? And there are a number of things that go into deciding how long a record should be kept. And there are 4 values that determine that for a record: administrative, fiscal, legal, and historical. Administrative is just how long does your office need to have the record to function. Grade transcripts. There'll be some definition in your office that you have to keep grade transcripts for this long. I'm not sure what it is. Maybe it's so many years after someone graduates. It could be any number of things. Some things might be legally permanent. If you're in Child Protective Services, almost every record in Child Protective Services that involves the child is considered a permanent record, no matter how old that child eventually becomes. Child enforcement, though, some of those records are no longer permanent so many years after emancipation. Child support enforcement, I should have said. That's the administrative part. How long do you have to keep the record to do the administrative stuff that your business, that your office does? In this case, DD, of course. So you talk to the person who creates the record. How long are you going to need this? Is there a law or a rule applicable to this? Is something in the revised code say you have to keep this for so long? Or have you just been to a conference and someone says, you know, best practices, these kinds of things, you should have those on hand 10 years after the child emancipates, or maybe the child doesn't emancipate. There'll be something to go on. You have to figure that out. That's the administrative value. Fiscal, dealing with money. How long do you have to keep the record for purposes of an audit? Easy ones are often you get grants. Grants often have something about you must keep these records for X years after the end of the grant. You build that into your retention policy. It's little things like that. Other things are simply you have to keep this until it's audited, or maybe a year after it's audited. In that case, you wait till it's audited. Once it's officially audited, then you can destroy it after however long you need to be. What is the fiscal policy? Again, these are values that affect how long you have to keep a record. Legal. Does the record document any rights or obligations? Is there a legal hold due to a court case? For example, when I was getting into records initially, I'm from Fairfield County, as she said. This happened a few years ago, but our clerk of courts came under indictment, eventually was convicted, went to prison for various things done wrong in office. At that point, all these records dealing with her role in office as the clerk of courts and how she dealt with her employees, a lot of it dealt with having her employees work on her campaign while they were working as a clerk, that kind of stuff. All those employment records and payment records, travel records, they were on a legal hold. Even if we would have been allowed to destroy them under normal circumstances, we couldn't because there was a legal case. And as long as that case was unresolved, we had to keep that information. A bigger case of that, most counties, maybe all of them, were involved in the opioid case, where the prosecuting attorneys from Ohio and other states brought suit against the manufacturers. A lot of counties were party to that. All these records that dealt with the use of the opioids and their administration and so on within the county, those were put on legal hold. And we had to make sure we never destroyed any of those records as long as that case was out there. So there's a legal retention possible. And lastly, there's historical. Sometimes a record exists, you know you could destroy it, but there's something about the record that has historical value. Maybe it tells a story that you want to remember for all time. You know, maybe this child graduated, but this record documents certain things they did while they were under your care and help define what they went on to as an adult. Things like that. Other things may make something historical. Sometimes records consider historical because they're from 100 years ago and they're handwritten in a leather-bound volume. You may want to keep those just because of the historical value. That, again, we're talking about how long do you need to keep the record. These values affect retention, how long you have to keep them. But back to just what is a record. The real important thing is a record, the definition of a record, whether an item is a record is dependent on its content, not its form. I dealt with elected officials a lot in my life and in my IT career. Elected officials are always trying to find ways to get around the public information meeting, public meeting laws, it seems like. And then you hear stories about this. And so they think that because we didn't take minutes, it's not a record. That's not the case. There have been stories, I've read them, it's been a number of years ago, where you have, normally you have 3 county commissioners. You get 2 commissioners, and maybe they're trying to build a case against the one. They don't like each other for some reason. And they decide to talk about what they're going to do at the meeting to do something about this. And so they text back and forth on their private phone. Well, a couple things have happened. They're talking about county business. That's a record. Doesn't matter if it's on their private phone. They're talking about county business, and you have 2 or 3 commissioners meeting. That's a quorum. Doesn't matter that it's texting. Doesn't matter that's electronic. Doesn't matter you didn't hold it in the meeting room where you normally hold county commissioner meetings. It's a record because you're discussing what your office does. You can't hide it just by pretending it's electronic. You can't hide it in my personal email or my personal phone. That's irrelevant. It's only relevant on what happened, what was discussed, what was written down. It doesn't have to be official meetings. But so these are just examples. Content determines whether it's a record. Like I said, birthday announcements, not a record. But 2 people discussing a child's case or texting about a child's case, all of a sudden you've created a record. That's part of it. It's all about content, not form. However, sometimes form have historical value. So if your DD has been in business long enough and you've got student records on cuneiform tablets, you might want to keep those because of its historical value. These are really outlandish ones, but you could understand if someone had an actual original copy of the Declaration of Independence, cornerstones of when historical buildings were built. You don't have to keep those. There's no law you says have to keep them, but they have historical significance just of the very form that they have. So just be aware of that. So again, those are things that influence how long you have to keep a record. I'm going to circle back again to what is a record, because we're going to talk, I'm going to repeat this like 3 or 4 or 5, 6 times to help get it just straight. What's a record? Based on that huge long paragraph I read, people like the Karma group that she mentioned in my little bio have pulled out what they call the 3-prong test on whether something's a record. First prong, is it stored on a fixed medium? And when I mentioned in there, I had that one slide talked about 1306.11 or whatever it was, or 01. Talk about electronic records. It only exists to say fixed medium doesn't mean it has to be on physical piece of paper. Fixed medium can be a cassette plate, tape. It can be recorded in Zoom. It could be in the cloud. It doesn't matter how. They could still consider a fixed medium. The point is, something has happened that captured that transaction, that conversation, whatever that meeting was or whatever happened, and captured it in such a way that if you wanted to review it at a later date, you could. You may have to get access to it, but it exists in a point where, unlike a conversation where if I pass you in the hall and I happen to say something about Johnny, that's now wandered off into the ether of the universe. It doesn't exist in any fixed medium. Now, don't pretend you can have meetings like that and get around public information laws. That's a whole different issue. But a fixed medium means it's been recorded somehow, and there's any way it gets recorded that I could review it later on. So it's been on a fixed medium, and it came under the jurisdiction of your office. You did this as part of your business. You can't pretend you're not doing business when you're talking about the business of the office. Again, that example. I can't talk about a student to someone outside the office and say I was in the office and not office business. The fact that it was about the student means it was office business. That makes a record. So it came under your office. And it serves a document, and that's just all those words about documenting your office. Those are just different things about what your office might do. That's what makes it a record. So, talked about what a record is. We talked about what influences how long you have to keep it. Now we're going to talk a little bit about process. And so I'm putting a lot of stuff into our little 45. We have an hour together. I'm trying to get most of it in 45 minutes in case there are questions. So there's a lot we're condensing here. So again, we talked about what a record is, talked about retention, how long you may have to keep it. We want to talk a little about process. This is where we're going to get into some forms that I have that I've given you. So first of all, again, ORC states that the Ohio History Connection, anyone heard of that? Anyone ever gone and seen the historic village and so on? That organization, beyond the museum and the village, is also the state archives. It's basically the records administrator for the state of Ohio and the people who oversee legally all the rest of us in our records administration. They are the state archivist administration as established by Ohio Revised Code. Within everything Ohio History Connection does is a department called the Local Government Records Program, who are specifically designed to work with people like you and like I was to identify and preserve local government records, especially that have enduring historical value. So they have put together a process to deal with preserving your records as well as disposing of records that need to be disposed of when it's appropriate. So there are 3 forms that they've mentioned. Now I'm going to go through them real quickly here just to mention them. We're going to go back to them specifically. There's an RC1, which is for the one-time disposal of obsolete records. The RC1 is for those records that you don't use anymore. Maybe you had a program that was based on a grant. The grant ended 10 years ago. You don't do that program anymore. Someone got the new office. They opened the closet. They cleared it out. They found a box. And lo and behold, there are the records from the grant from 10 years ago. How do you get rid of those records? They don't exist today. There's no retention schedule to put them under. They're obsolete records. That's what the RC1 is for. It allows you to say, we have these records, they're old, they should have been destroyed, we want to destroy them, that kind of thing. I'll show you an example of it in a minute. The other one is the RC2. And notice I have an asterisk beside the word must. We'll come back to that asterisk in a minute. The RC2 is the records retention schedule. That's the form that I worked on with the Fairfield County DD that specifies here are the records that we create, here's the formats they exist in, and here's their retention schedules, how long we have to keep them. That retention schedule tells us when we're allowed to destroy said records. Proper records disposal is a necessary safeguard for you, your staff, your organization, and/or your clients or customers. Sometimes people, when they deal with records, look at them and say, it's too much work, too complicated. We've just decided every record's permanent and we're keeping everything. That's going to get you into trouble one of these days. And there are a couple things that can happen. Number one, anyone heard of the data breaches? There's like one in the newspaper every single day. So every old record you keep that you could have destroyed, you're making the people who that record reflects vulnerable to a data breach. Because if you haven't destroyed it, it's still there. You get a data breach, their stuff may be put out there. If you destroy it, it's not available for that. So that's one reason to destroy records. Another reason is you have public information requests. Anyone received one of those in your office? And someone wants, someone's emails dealing with Johnny for the last 25 years or whatever it might be. If someone asks for a record, and under normal circumstances, you would have to give that record. So not every record is available to public information requests. There are some records that are exempt from that. But as long as you're legally allowed to fulfill the public information request with that specific kind of record, and if that record still exists somewhere in your organization, even if you could have destroyed it, the fact that it exists means you have to find it and provide it. If you can't prove you destroyed it, you either have to prove it was destroyed or find it. And if it exists on someone's 3.5-inch floppy, who's old enough to remember 3.5-inch floppy drives? If you find, student records for 1985 on 3.5-inch floppy drives, and someone says, I need copies of that, and you look at your computers, how many have a 3.5-inch floppy drive on your computer today? Or have one somewhere in your office? I actually have one in my basement. I haven't had to get it out in 10 years, I think. But you would be required by law to find a 3.5-inch floppy drive, hook it to your modern computer, and start reading those disks to get that information if it exists. Now, if you have destroyed those records, you can tell them those records are gone per our retention schedule, which was set up according to Ohio Revised Code. We can't give it to you. We don't have to give it to you. We were allowed to destroy it. So I just go through all of that to say, records that you're able to destroy, you should destroy. It makes everyone's life happier and better. Now, there's an IT caveat, and I was in IT. When you deal with records management, in today's world, you have to work with your IT department. So if you don't have a friendly relationship with the IT department, that's probably step one. Go home and develop a friendly relationship with your IT department. Most of them like donuts. Start there. But you have to convince them that in your electronic systems, when we say we want to destroy these records, it means deleted, purged, gone from the system. It does not mean marked for deletion, but still exists over here when no one sees it, but they're actually still on the server. Because if that's all that's happened, you could still be responsible for producing those records at a later date. Most modern database systems have the ability to purge the record, which means it is gone. But you've got to convince your IT people of that, because they don't want to purge. And the reason they want to purge is they've had people call them and say, delete these records. They've deleted them. And 5 days later, they say, oh, no, I need that back. Why did you delete it? You told me to. So they have a knee-jerk reaction to just hide them from you but not really purge them. But if you dispose of them, it means purge. So you got to talk to them about that. And RC3 is the Certificate of Records Disposal. We'll come back to that in a minute. The records disposal is the form you actually fill out when you want to destroy a record. You're ready to destroy it. The RC2 says when you can destroy it. The RC3 says, okay, we now can destroy these records. Must. Here's my caveat. You really have to have an RC2. That's the retention schedule. The retention schedule spells out, here's our records, and here's when we're allowed to destroy them. you really should use an RC1 when you find any old records you want to dispose of, because it documents that you found them, you recognize them, you were allowed to destroy them. However, if the record has an entry in the RC2, your record retention schedule, and if the LGRP, that Ohio History Collection Organization I mentioned before, if they don't require that they review the records first, and there's a column that tells you whether they want to do that or not, and I'll show you that in a minute, technically you don't have to do an RC3 to destroy the record. I said RC2. I should have said RC3. I noticed that till today. It's my mistake. You don't have to have an RC3 to destroy a record if the LGRP doesn't need to see it. However, I highly recommend you do it anyway, because the RC3 is the form you can show someone that says, I want to see these records, and you say they're destroyed, and he says, prove it. You can say, here's our certificate where we legally destroyed it. It just makes life simpler for you in the long run. And we'll come back to this RC3 in a minute. That's funny. I've reviewed this thing 12 times. Didn't catch that should have been a 3. Oh, well. So what I want to do now is talk about the RC1, 2, and 3. You have a copy of these in that pile of stuff that's in the drive. I just want to show you some of the stuff that's on there. So there's a page of instructions. There's a note on how to email the LGRP program, localrecs@ohiohistory.org. That's on every single one of these, so you can find that. They all have a very similar first page, which you're just filling out identifying information. Basically, my mouse got stuck, there we go. Basically, who you are, DD, you're the board of DD and you're a county, who your records commission is. And that's something else you have to figure out. Who is your records commission? There are actually a couple different types of records commissions that can exist under state law, the Ohio Revised Code. I don't know what your organization or your county is doing. At one time, Fairfield County had a data board, and our Fairfield County Board of DD petitioned to be part of the data board. And we granted that, and we worked together. Then Fairfield County disbanded the data board and made a records commission. It made various changes you don't need to be aware of. And now we have a records commission, so it can change. You'll need to talk to whoever in your office and find out, well, who is our records commission? And for all I know, in your organization, maybe it's just in-house, but you have a records commission that you need to put together or find out where it is. Come back your mouse, here we are. The records commission will fill this out. Someone's email address has to go here so that this gets returned to you, because down here, you're going to eventually send it to the Ohio History Connection, LGRP, that local Recs email address. Once you get it all filled out, that's who you'll send it to. So the RC1 just has these 5 columns. A schedule number, which with an obsolete record, you may not have one, so you could ignore that. If it doesn't have, you just put not applicable, NA. Title and description, including dates, just describe what the heck these records are. You don't have to have 1,000 words, but more than just letters. Give some indication what it is you're trying to get rid of and what dates are in there. What are you destroying? Is it paper? Is it microfilm? Are you purging a database? Are you retaining anything in any other type? And that's all you have to fill out for every one of the things you want to destroy. Those are those RC1 records, unique records that you don't deal with anymore. Usually someone found them in a closet. Column 5, that's for the LGRP to fill out. You leave that blank. That's where they'll come back and tell you whether or not they want the record. Most of what's going on with LGRP is they want a chance to look at records before you destroy them to see if they want them in case, for whatever reason. I've never had them ask for our records, but in theory, you may have some they decide, oh no, we want those, send them to us instead. This is where they'll tell you whether they want to do that or not. Now the RC2, again, information about how to fill it in, local Recs email address, identifying information like we talked about before. This is the RC2 that you fill in for your records retention. This is where you tell the organization, you identify what records you have, ones that you create on a daily basis, and how long you have to keep them. And you have 4 columns to fill in. You'll fill in a schedule number, a record title and description, a retention period, and a media type. Now I'm going to jump over to here. This is what we developed, and I gave you a copy of this for, where are we at? Good. This is what we developed for Fairfield County Board of DD. So here's the identifying information. Fairfield County Board of Development Disabilities. Todd was the one in charge of this particular program. It went to our Records Commission. Bennett Neiswinger did all that part of it. It was sent to Higher Houston Connection where they signed it. And this is what it looks like. So just go through these 4 columns again. Schedule number can be anything you put in. There's no guidance on that whatsoever. However you want to create the numbering system. And DD was the first one that did something I thought was pretty clever. They decided to do a letter and number designation, as you can see. So they divide their records into this many categories identified by these letters. And then they started numbering them starting with 0005. So we used 4 digits starting with 5, and we just went sequentially 5, 10, 15, 20, and so on through the line. What this allowed you to do is figure out, well, what category is this record? The schedule identifies the category, and then it just fits that category somewhere. We went by 5s because you never know what's going to happen. Next year, something might come along and you find out, oh, now we have to keep a new record. It's a type of correspondence, but it's something different than regular or transient. And you want to create a new category for it. By going by 5s, I can make an adjustment to this. You still have to do it as a process. You have to add your new record sequence, submit it for review to the Records Commission, and the LGRP will review it and send it back to you. But you can then call it ADM-0013 instead of having to renumber every single one of these. And there are like 9 pages of this. So it's nice to have a little bit of room to insert things. But again, this has been approved at a specific date and time. It was approved on the 4th by Todd. It was approved on the 10th of October by the Records Commission. It was approved by the 12th by LGRP. If I need to change this, I have to go to my original copy, add my changes, resubmit it to the Records Commission, who will approve it, who then has to resubmit it to LGRP, who will have to approve it, who will then send it back to you. But these numbers allow you to do that easily. Then you have to describe the records. And this is a balancing act. You can go 2 extremes. And I can be ridiculous with this. One extreme is you have one record series, it's just called records, and everything is under there. That never works. I mean, you're trying to put everything under there. I've had other people who want to do correspondence from attorneys, correspondence from parents, correspondence from students. That's way too detailed. Find a series, a description that's descriptive enough, you know what you're talking about, but broad enough, you can fit a lot of stuff into it. But however you want to describe it. Then you have retention period.
Hey, Mark.
Yeah.
We have a question. Real
I'm
quick.
sorry, yes. I didn't see that. Go ahead.
So I have a records retention policy or this form that was approved by the Records Commission back in 2002.
Yeah.
A lot of the information now is outdated.
Right.
We don't keep it anymore, or the names have changed. Do I need to use that original to make the changes, or can I submit a new RC3?
You can submit a brand new one at that point.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's what we essentially did.
And then, as you said, the schedule number, I mean, they had some really odd ones back in 2002. Yeah. I can make up new ones.
Whatever you want
to. Okay.
And one of the pieces of information in the packet was this one piece where DD describes to their entire office what all that stuff means. So you might read that and see if that makes sense for you.
So, but if I have a records commission, county records commission that has a lot of the same information, and can I do one that's just specific to DD?
You will want one just specific to DD. And every department in the county will have one specific to them.
Can I reference the county one?
You can. You have to decide if you want to, but that is a possibility. One thing we did in Fairfield County is we created a personnel records retention schedule and a county general. And we shoved basic stuff, general correspondence, general faxes. Under personnel, we had pay stubs and that kind of stuff. Things that every organization had. And we allowed people to say reference personnel or reference general if you want to. Yeah, but yeah, Ann has a response. But they decided to go differently on it. But I'm saying you can do it, but you don't have to.
So our county has a lot of record retention schedules, but they're not easy to find. And so instead of referencing it, we chose to duplicate it. So we made things match, but I don't want to have to look through 9 documents to find if we had to save something. So we actually just mimicked what was on the county general, but wrote it on ours so that it was just one place to look.
And it really depends on how your county is structured. So title description, retention period. I want to mention this. How long do you have to keep the record? On my slide, I have this. I'm going to read it here, so I have the slide. Retention periods can be set as time, 3 years, permanent, something like that. Event, until audited, until recorded with the county, or a combination. 3 years after case closed, life of levy plus 1 year. Any of those kinds of things can be a retention period. Anything that indicates how long this record has to be kept. And events are very nice because events have they allow you to be a little amorphous on exactly when to do the record, but once the event has happened, now you know exactly when to do it. But it can be any number of the combination of those things. Like here is 1 year and no longer of administrative value. And a basic one, until no longer of administrative value. That's that transient correspondence, like business cards. Things that don't do much for your business. It's just transient. We can get rid of them as long as we don't need them anymore. That kind of thing. Media type is how you're keeping this record. And for DD, we decided just to put the word multi. In other words, the media type could be anything. I've seen some people, it's not my favorite, but I've seen them have one record retention schedule for paper and another one, which is the same number with an A after it, for after it's been scanned and it's imaged electronically. I don't know why you need 2 record schedules for that. Just put multi. As soon as you scan the record of note is now the scanned version. You can get rid of the paper one because you've kept the scanned version. And the multi allows you to do that. Now we don't have to distinguish between the two. So those are the 4 things you have to fill in. You have to identify all your record types. 5 and 6 you don't fill in. That's LGRP's responsibility. They'll do 2 things. In 5, they'll make little notes that you just need to be aware of. For example, if I go far enough, I know it's here because I saw it, there it is. This references the word audit. 7 years provided audited. They'll put a stamp. This is what audited means. They want to make sure you really understood the word audited. That came from LGRP. The other thing is this little checkbox here. You do not check that, LGRP does. That's where LGRP indicates if you ever say you want to destroy these records, they want the chance to look at it first and see whether they want them or not. Now, in this case, every time LGRP did a check mark was where DD made it a permanent record anyway, so they weren't going to destroy them no matter what. But LGRP just put a check mark there just to make sure, don't even try to destroy these without talking to us first. Okay, come on, Nels. Now, I want to go quickly to an RC3. So the RC2, you tell it what records you have, what the retention period is, which tells you when you're allowed to destroy them. The RC3 is where you actually say, I'm destroying these records. So again, instructions, identifying information, someone's email address to go here so that LGRP knows who to return it to once they've signed it. And you have to fill in these things. Record series title, that's what you create, that's what's in the RC2. You can take it from the RC2 if you want. Or if you want to be a little more specific, you can be more specific. You found these records, you're going to destroy them, but it should be something reflective in the RC2 description. That schedule number, ADM-0050 or whatever it might be. Date it was approved by the Records Commission, which was 10/10/23 on the DD one we looked at. What's being destroyed? Are you destroying paper? Are you destroying, purging a database? Whatever format it existed in. Any type being retained, if you are, maybe you're converting a bunch of stuff That wasn't paper to microfilm, and then you would put microfilm here. Or you may just put NA. You're not retaining it. These records would be destroyed, never to be seen again. Inclusive dates, exactly what's being covered. A proposed date of destruction. Now, the proposed date of destruction can't be next week, because once you fill this in, and number 7, you do not fill in. That's LGRP use. Once you fill this in, you have to take it to your records commission. So when you start talking about when I'm going to destroy a record, the first question is, when does my commission meet? I can't destroy it before the commission meets. I got to know that date. I got to get on their agenda. Once they meet, I have to talk to whoever's in charge and say, when are you sending this to LGRP? Because I need to know when they're going to get it. And whatever date that is, you have to have at least 15 days. It can be more than 15 days. It can be 6 months. It could be 8 months. I wouldn't do more than a year. If it's going to be more than a year, wait till next year and do it. It can be in the future, but you can't say, you have to destroy it sometime in the future or past when LGRP has had a chance to look at it. So you'd fill all that in, the records, you sign it, the records commission signs it, they have put an address, an email address here, they sent to LGRP if it needs to go there. LGRP will indicate whether or not they want any of these records sent to them, and they can destroy it. Now, one other thing you can do here. I have said you only have to have an RC2, RC3 when it must go to the LGRP. You don't have to have it if LGRP doesn't require to see those records. You should still have it, though. So here's what I told my people. Whenever you're getting rid of records and you've identified, and people are usually doing it about once a year, so it's usually a multi-page list of records they were destroying. Identify, separating the two types. Separate them into one type. These are all the records LGRP doesn't want to see. They don't have that check mark in the RC2. Put those on one RC3. Because since LGRP never needs to see those, they weren't asking about them, it doesn't have to go to LGRP. It only has to go to the Records Commission, and then you're done. Those records, well, LGRP has put that little check mark and said, we need to see them first, put that on a separate RC3. That way, when you submit both RC3s, the one group, which only has to go to the RC3, you can destroy as soon as they're done with it. You don't have to wait for LGRP. The other one, which will be much fewer records, Records Commission, then LGRP, but you're not holding everything on hold while LGRP reviews that. My only thing I would mention is with email, because of the way email works, you're probably not going to do RC2s for a lot of email. But email is a whole nother beast that people don't deal with very well, because email is not a record. It's only a record if what's in the email is a record. And you have to train your staff to recognize that. And if information's in an email, it's a record, it's got to be put somewhere where it is stored as a record in some fashion, whatever that fashion might be. And let me get back to where we is here. Yes.
While you're on that, when you made that comment about email and it's the information that's within the email, could you talk about social media posts? Because I was thinking same thing.
Same thing.
I mean, the content within there may be a record. Sometimes it may not be, but how we retain that, you use archiving services or what? Because if Meta goes away tomorrow, a whole lot goes away.
Yeah. And it's something people don't deal with very well, but any social media can be a record if it documents the office in some fashion. If it doesn't, what Fairfield County basically told people was, don't talk about the office in social media, only do press releases, because then it's not a record. The press release is a record coming out of public relations. So you may do social media based on weather events or school closings, that kind of thing, but don't talk about policy, don't engage with, whether they do or not, it's a different story, but don't engage with the voters in social media, because then you're creating a record and you're going to have to save those somehow. And a lot of places don't do that. There are whole companies that exist on archiving social media if you want to do it right. Real quickly, because we're heading out of time. Paper, microfilm, electronic, those are your 3 types of things you can keep records on. If you're building a place to store records, here's a note on requirements for humidity and temperature and how they should be put together. Some notes about these 3. Paper and microfilm, iReadable, electronic, not iReadable, but accessible. What should you use? And it all depends on what's permanent or not. Non-permanent retention periods, you can do anything. It's very black and white. Anything that's permanent, it becomes a gray area. People want to make everything electronic. Archivists, professional records management archivists, don't recognize any electronic form as a valid means of storing. So does anyone recognize these things? None of these hardly exist anymore except CDs and DVDs. And DVDs do not have a lifespan of 100 years. People say maybe 10, maybe longer. I had a court, they had a couple years worth of transcripts on cassette tape that they stored in the attic. If they needed to review those transcripts, they're gone. I don't say how in the world, because they're already 10 years old, in fact, 15 years in attic storage. That's the trouble. This stuff, unless electronic gets moved, every time you change systems, you stand a chance of losing the information. This is my favorite quote from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Humans have a compulsion to keep records and lists and files, so many in fact that they have to invent new ways to store them microscopically. Otherwise, the records, would overrun all known civilization. So my recommendation, we image records for the needs of the present. By image means you've turned it into some electronic format, because electronic databases, multiple levels of access, searchable, viewable, easier to deal with, but you can't be guaranteed they're going to be there 10, 20, 30 years from now. Anything that's permanent, an archivist is going to tell you to either microfilm or keep on paper one way or the other. That's the recommendation. It is not a law. That's why it's a gray area. So if you ask an archivist what I do with permanent records, they'll tell you paper or microfilm. You go out to one of these tech companies, what I do with permanent records, they'll say, oh, we got the great database for this, and we have backups and 3-point backups and so on, and cloud storage is wonderful. And it's great until you have to change from system A to system B and make sure everything gets through there. So I got a bunch of questions for you to think about. Do you need an RC2? Does it need updated? Do you know where your records are? Have you been destroying records? Do you need to move your records somewhere better? There's some other things in there. That's my contact information. If you need information about this, you have questions about it, feel free to contact me. That's my daughter's hamster Riku, and that's the goose that visited me the other day in my front lawn. Any other questions? There's a lot here. Yeah, go ahead real quick.
Just a quick question on duplicates. So we know we have originals. Some, like the HR office, might keep duplicates of corrective actions or grievance hearings or things like that. Do you need to fill out the RC3 for duplicates?
No, because only one of those is the record. So whichever office is one responsible to keep the record, that's the record. Everything else is a duplicate. It's not a record at that point.
Mark, what's the difference between the RC1 and the RC3?
The RC1 is for records that are obsolete. They don't exist on the RC2 because you don't create those records anymore. It's usually someone has found them in an old box somewhere, and they're records you don't have anymore, but you still want to get rid of them. So anything that's obsolete that don't exist anymore, that's the main difference. Yeah.
Just a second.
Talking about electronic data, but let's say a DD agency wants to get started with making the big push to purge old electronic data that they don't need anymore. How do you recommend that they make that approach to purging that data? Maybe they might find it intimidating. It's years and years of data that's been stored over time, and they just don't know how to get started.
You're going to have a sit down with whoever's in charge of the IT, in charge of that system IT-wise, and develop a plan. Because the IT is going to have to help you understand how the records exist, and you have to help them understand they're obsolete and need to be purged, and then you have to work together and figure out how to make that happen.
This has been very informative, so I appreciate you coming. I have two questions. One, did you mention that you have to go to the Records Commission, the local Records Commission, to destroy anything that's not checkmarked?
What I recommended was, I recommend that you do so.
Okay.
You don't, legally, you don't have to. If the RC2 says I can destroy these records after 7 years, and LGRP hasn't asked for them, and legally you can say, by RC2, we can just destroy them.
Okay.
I've always told my people, I think it's nice to have the RC3 because now you have that piece of paper that says we reviewed these records, someone else looked at them, we were legally allowed to destroy them. It just
Okay.
gives you a documentation trail.
We keep like an Excel sheet that kind of tracks of what we do. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. My next one was, okay, so we have permanent records like board meeting minutes. So we have paper records that we're turning into electronic records, which I hear you don't really care for. With that, if they're 50 years plus, would we need to take that to someone to confirm its destruction from paper to, because it's a permanent
Because
record?
of that project, I would say, yes, I would on the RC3, that's where you would say you're destroying paper, you're preserving whatever you're converting it into, PDF or some database or whatever.
Perfect.
Right.
Okay. Thank you.
It just, again, it's just a paper trail. I like paper trails for this kind of stuff. It's just a recommendation, not a legal requirement, but just a local. Unless it's a record LGRP has put a check mark beside, but right. Then they'll have to approve it and they'll just approve it at that point. But you would have to send it to them.
Someone from the chat asked about the PDFs that you were sharing, and they are in Member Connect.
Yes.
They are uploaded to Member Connect. If you received the welcome email, we did link to the slides, but we'll also send something out after the convention, and we'll relink to the slides and any other slides that people have sent later. We'll have those on there too.
And then this piece of paper, which has also been uploaded, but I handed out here. These are organizations you want to take a look at. Karma is an organization of records managers and archivists at the county level. You may want to look at getting connected with them. They have a listserv. Once you belong to them, and it doesn't cost anything to belong, you have access to the listserv. Once you have access to the listserv, you can ask them anything about records. Within 24 hours of a business day, someone will probably come up with an answer for you because someone out there has already dealt with it. So take a look. I've got information. I've got a letter from Karma, an application for membership that's out there. You can read that. I find them extremely helpful. The listserv is active all year long. They have 2 meetings a year, one at High History Connection, one in any county throughout the state.
Does anybody else have any questions? Well, this was very informative.
you very
We
much.
really appreciated it. This has been something that's, people have been bringing up for quite a while, and it's taken me a while to find you, but I'm very thankful, and we really appreciate all the good information. Let's hear it from Mark.
You're welcome.